Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Nicole Frolic of Inflexible Me, and today I have a really fun interview for you. I am joined by John Mathis, who's actually recently on my podcast, Enlighten Up. His episode was Shopping at the Cosmic Costco, Remote Viewing, and Reptilian Encounters. And of course, John is actually one of our most listened to episodes. He had a wealth of experiential knowledge and insight to share with us. And I thought it'd be really great to have him on and share more information, especially some topics that are really kind of close to his heart, or so I guess you'd say he's kind of really intrigued about and interested in. So welcome, John, to the show. John, how are you?
If I was any better, I'd be twins. How are you?
Well, it's always a pleasure to chat with you because I love your sense of humor. I love how you take spirituality and turn it into a very lighthearted and a fun journey. Even though there are times where it can be quite painful, but it's always nice to inject some humor along the way.
Yeah, it's like a trip to the proctologist's office. Sometimes it's painful but necessary.
Exactly. So before John and I started, we were just chatting, and John has something that he'd really like to share with us, and I think it's really interesting information. And so we're going to get into psychokinesis. Did I say that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And how you believe and can prove that consciousness isn't local. So do you want to kind of go into that story for all of my listeners?
Sure. So I'm lucky enough to live in Durham, North Carolina, and Duke University used to have a school of parapsychology. So from, I think it was 1937 to the mid-70s, the dean of the School of Parapsychology was Joseph B. Rhine. When that fell out of favor, all the research was still going on. So J.B. Rhine created the Rhine Research Institute. And so all that psychic, metaphysical, spiritual, however you want to quantify it, all that research continued, but it was done privately. And just recently, I was part of a research project where the director was looking at PK, or psychokinesis, which he defines as a mind-matter interaction at a distance, or non-direct. So pushing over a 2-year-old is a direct physical link, but if I could do it with my mind, that would be super cool, except for the 2-year-old. So there were several different projects done to kind of test this PK theory. And I was part of one of those experiments, but the evening was all about him revealing the results of all of this research. One of the things in particular that got me, I didn't know it was going to become a mental chew toy, but that's exactly what it has become. There was a gentleman who is a self-described energetic healer. And he's been tested by several different institutes and institutes of higher learning using blinded protocols. And one of the things that they did at the Rhine Research Institute was they had a device that reads up to, I think it's 6 photons per second. Photons of light. And then what we do is we put the person into a almost like a bank safe, so there's no light. And then we put them into another room inside that room, which again, no light. And then inside that room is a third thing called a Faraday cage. And the Faraday cage makes sure that there is no type of electromagnetic interference. Nothing can get in and out from an energetic point of view.
It's almost like Russian dolls.
Yeah. It's kind of, a little nesting going on. So this guy named Ed was sitting in front of this device. And so when he turned on his energy, the device started recognizing photons of light being generated from Ed. And
so the device and Ed were inside this Faraday cage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And so we did baseline readings first. And even then, I think there was like 6 to 12 photons of light still coming in. but just enough to show just enough of a scratch on the output. And it's like, okay, Ed, do your thing. And all of a sudden it spikes. And he's like 20, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. And Ed was like, do you need more? It's like, well, yeah, Ed. I mean, go ahead and let her rip, Tater Chip. We want to see what you can do here. And so he's a very numbers-oriented guy. And he's like, well, I think I can get to 1 million. And it's like, okay, give us 1 million. And so he focuses his energy and blows it out. And he's around, I think it was like 800,000 photons that he's generating.
And this is 800,000 photons of light per second?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So then it was like, okay, we're gonna reset. And then the thought is how much of what Ed is doing is through the reception device of the lens versus is he having an effect on the machine directly?
Gotcha. Okay.
So they closed the aperture of the lens so no light could get in. And when they turned on the device and asked him to do his thing, he did it. And the results were diminished, but there still were results. So then it was
how much were the results diminished by?
Again, I see the graph in my head from the presentation. I don't remember the numbers, but I can tell you on the graph looked like maybe a tenth of what they were previously. So like where there was this monster spike that looked like on the graph, it looked like it might have been 6-7 inches long. This one may have been almost an inch.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's like where he was the strongest, you could see the same corollary, but it wasn't the same magnitude, or wasn't the same value. So it was like, okay, well, he can affect electrical devices, so maybe we need to have him step out. So they had him step out of the Faraday cage and repeat the same thing, and he was able to have the same effect, the diminished effect. So it's like, okay, we know it's not electromagnetic in nature because the Faraday cage is well understood as being able to block out electromagnetic energy. So what's going on? What type of energy or what type of thing can get through that kind of electromagnetic barrier? And that's when I started thinking, it's like, well, it has to be something that exists outside of time-space. Because if physical things don't block it, then it doesn't require it doesn't operate in the physical universe. So, that's when I started getting the furrowed brow and crossing my arms and doing the professorial, goat stroke and, let me think about this. So then he tells me that Ed goes back home. He lives somewhere in rural Georgia. And again, the lab is up here in Durham, North Carolina. And so the director, John, he calls down to Ed and says, hey, Ed, let's do this again. And Ed's like, okay, sure. And again, they got the same diminished results.
So now what's happened is there's like hundreds of miles in between him and the device, and he's still having the same diminished effect on the device.
He's having the same effect at his remote location several hundred miles away that he was having when he was sitting right next to the device, but just on the outside of the Faraday cage.
Gotcha.
So yes, that's correct. So then now what it's telling me is that not only is this not dependent on Newtonian physics where electricity is concerned, but now distance is not an issue. So now I'm thinking, okay, this is more than quantum mechanics going on, because the only thing I could come up with my own experience that was on par with that was my own near-death experience. And again, being a research nurse and a pharmaceutical clinician, I'm a kind of left-brain chap. I try to do like Mark Twain said, don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. But at the same time,
not me.
Well, and the thing is too, there's so much going on. So for example, Dr. Dean Radin from IONS, he has a book that just came out that's magic something. I don't know. I'm terrible. I should have prepared for this. But Dean Radin talks about how if you're going to have any kind of response or a standard deviation from norm or from chance, then that is measured as sigma. And a lot of people know about like Six Sigma. So Six Sigma from a business standpoint is a set of processes to make sure you're doing things from an optimum perspective in business. But statistically speaking, the deviation from norm is equivalent to 1,000,000,000 to 1 odds. And psychic research has been going on using scientific method for about 100 years now. And a lot of the research is achieving 3 to 6 sigma degree of deviation,
which is very high.
Well, 3 sigma would be evidence that you would want to present for your Nobel Peace Prize.
Okay.
So the fact that we're doing 6 sigma work ought to just cause people to shit their pants. And instead we run up against people who are so enamored with their own way of thinking that they'll just flat out deny you publication. And so in 2017, the president of the American Statistical Society, during her speech, she mentioned that they were seeing 3 to 6 sigma results in psi testing. And if this were any other type of research, it would have long ago been accepted as reality. And she had hoped that at some point in time, scientists would come around and realize that. And so for have someone that's so left brain and represent that type of august scientific body to say that, that's huge. And so to kind of bring that back now to John's presentation, so he said that they were coming up with 3 sigma deviation. So, I mean, it's substantial. Now, to look at the results were small. I mean, it's like the movie Phenomena, where, John Travolta is, meditating books off the shelf and spinning sunglasses around, and Firestarter from that Stephen King book.
Yeah.
It's not that level, but things that are on the micro level, like looking at a slide and having a slide with a cancer cell on it and looking at that cancer cell and causing it to explode. Looking at the rate of penetration from a high density to low density, having that reverse. And so that molecules are going back across the membrane, back to an area of higher concentration, which should not be happening. Mm-hmm. The things that are at a really small level, things that that I don't think requires a lot of mental energy to make happen, it's happening. It's been happening over 100 years. We have data to prove it, and yet it's still not being accepted.
And why do you think that is?
Because people are chicken shit.
It's okay. So, and anyone who's watching this video who is either a truth seeker or really well into their spiritual journey and have experienced some of the things that you're talking about, if you're on the front lines of things, you're always going to take a lot of hits for all the people that are behind you.
Absolutely.
And many times the greatest thinkers in our times now before us have always endured major ridicule until there's like this, it's like the tipping point, of when finally you get enough people adopting that perspective that the rest of the people can come behind it and say, oh, okay, there's more people believing in this now. Oh, more people are adopting it. I don't want to be left behind. So, it's not about now, like, not joining the crazy people. I got to join the crazy people or else I'll be the crazy person, so it's kind of one of those things where we're constantly facing it. And anyone who's trying to think outside the box, anyone who's trying to explain the unseen, explain the unexplainable, at least scientifically. And even in this case, you have science backing it up, but you still have people refusing it. And I think part of the reason is, because I think there's a lot of reasons, but part of the reason is that will you be ridiculed by your peers? And if you are, what will that cost your career? What will that cost your livelihood? There's a lot of factors involved in that.
Yeah, and the thing that just popped in my head is I think it wasn't Stephen Greer, it was someone else. But I think back in 2007, 2008, this guy organized a disclosure meeting and brought in folks that were retired senators, and then all these people from all walks of life, whether they were police officers or former military or people that basically had a story to explain that an extraterrestrial presence is here. The only people he could get to show up were the people who were retired or the people that didn't have much to lose. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, I know it's like we all want to have a roof over our head and food in our mouths. And so you don't want to jeopardize your professional career. But those are also the same folks that kind of say, off to the side, they'll pull you aside. And it's like, I like what you're doing. I believe what you're saying. And I've got my own experience with that. But there's no way in hell I want to step in front of a crowd and say that. When I was doing clinical research and also when I was working in the hospital and talking to heart surgeons and people that were getting multiple organ transplants, there was an awful lot of on the down low discussions about how personality traits from the donors were showing up in the organ recipients. So it's like, how in the world can someone who got a heart-lung transplant take on the personality traits of the recipient? It's not like we did a brain transplant, but obviously some of that junk DNA isn't so much junk.
Well, no, and I thoroughly believe that our consciousness is embedded in every cell. So if you're taking if you're taking a heart that has all the cells of its donor, the part of their consciousness is still in that heart. And so it makes complete sense that they would take on some of those traits. Now, like going back to what you were talking about with this whole PK experiment and the photons of light coming out, when you were talking about that, it made me think of long distance Reiki healing and how that proves how Reiki, long distance Reiki works. And that, it's light carries information. Light carries, we say like light carries code, light carries information. So it makes sense that I shouldn't say light is consciousness, but light carries the information of consciousness.
Yeah, light is a cheeky bastard. Are you familiar with the double slit experiment?
No.
Google it up. I've had enough wine that I can't speak with authority on it. But what I can tell you is that when they created a slit of paper, then light went through either as a photon or as a wave. And when they created a double slit, they were able to observe that light can do both. Show up as a single packet, a photon, or can be coordinated and be a wave. Nothing else in the universe does that. And if you look at data travels in packets. And when you chain together enough packets, you get a wave. So I can't, I'll tie that off there. But so having been doing Reiki for 22 years, to this day, I still can't tell you how it works. I can just tell you unequivocally it works. And again, I think there is an energetic component to that because I've learned not only is distance not an issue when it comes to Reiki healing, but neither is time. And that, again, is part of the quantum mechanics because time time is a Newtonian construct. Once you get into quantum physics, it's not so much about time as much as is there an observer.
Can you just touch on that a little bit more? Because I love that part of quantum physics and mechanics on how you need to have an observer.
I'm sure your listeners are probably familiar with a book called The Intention Experiment that came out probably 15 years ago. But one of the experiments they talked about was run by one of my heroes, Dr. Dean Radin. And the way they set up the experiment was they had a random or a random event generator that generated clicks. And it was either in a right channel or a left channel of an audio device. And so they set up this device, they put a cassette recorder in there with a cassette and closed up the safe and let it run. And so with it being a random number generator, you would think probably over time it would end up with a 50-50 distribution to left and right clicks. But there may have been a possibility too that there was going to be more right clicks than left clicks, because if you've ever done the flipping of the coin experiment, sometimes you get onto a run and it's like 4, 5, 12 times you'll just hit them all in a row and you're like, awesome. But if you do it long enough, then it kind of resets back to the 50-50 again. So they had a random number generator, generate a number of clicks. Then he would pull the cassette tape out, not knowing whether it was right or left dominant. He would then have a random number generator tell him which he should tell the client. Is this more right or more left? And when he told the people, this is going to have more right clicks than left clicks, I need you to count up both clicks and then tell me the difference, he was right almost 100% of the time when he gave the suggestion to the quote-unquote viewer of this quantum event. And so once I'll say non-local, once the non-local consciousness set about proving something in the physical universe, then it became so. Same thing with Reiki. If I set my intention for something to happen for a client, it doesn't matter the distance, it doesn't matter the time. I can put my non-local consciousness into that cosmic blender, and it comes out the other side the way the client needs it to. So that's where I'm kind of wrestling now, is that I suspected that consciousness was non-local based upon my Reiki work, but also based upon my near-death experience where, you know, I was in a coma for 14 days and physiologically should not have been conscious, but I absolutely was. Then if consciousness is non-local, then what are we? We really are meat suits. We're meat suits and an antenna. And I think maybe the brain is the antenna. And it's also it's not just an antenna, it's a sender receiver.
Yeah.
But I believe our 5 senses kind of gather the material needed to put together a request. And then that request then gets formed into an intention. The intention then comes out through your brain, the juicy meat part, and somehow interconnects with your non-local consciousness. The non-local consciousness, which then is able to interface with quantum stuff, then builds that request. And so whether that's, I want my Reiki treatment to help someone, or like Ed was doing, I want this machine to light up, or I want to find a good parking space when I go to the grocery store. I think that the people either consciously or subconsciously have figured out how that system works, are the ones who are being successful or are inordinately lucky and they don't know why. But I have no proof. But I mean, that was the result of this attending this Friday presentation. Is that I'm chewing on things that are my own experience, plus some of the things I've been involved with as a researcher, and just trying to make sense of it all.
Has there been anything that you've been able to manifest through that power of intention?
Yes.
Are you willing to share it with us?
Yes. So I'm kind of dragging. So I'm going to issue my disclaimer. When I first started doing Reiki, I was doing Reiki on plants and the pets and the food that I ate, and really basic stuff. But when I started doing it for people, and people were like, "Oh, wow, your hands are really hot," there was this huge ego thing that was cultivated. And the best throttle I know for me on manifestation is to let my ego get involved with the equation. So with that being said, I'll now tell you the stories. So I one time had a cat in my lap with a broken tail. I know because I broke it, and was cupping my hands around the break and was in tears because I love my cat, and when I pushed the drawer closed on the coffee table, I didn't know she was hiding under the coffee table, so she bolted out, and I closed it on her tail and heard it click and saw her run away, and the tail at a 90-degree angle. I don't know if it's necessarily broke, it's maybe dislocated, but anyway, it didn't look right. So I had my hands around the tail. I'm not actually touching it. I'm pumping all this energy into her, and with this energy also is emotion. So there's intellectual intent. I want this to be fixed, but there was emotional intent. I am so sorry this happened to you. I love you so much. I would not do this to you intentionally. And just cycling through all of these things, the left brain, right brain, and all of a sudden in my hands, it sounds like my knuckle popped. I'm like, okay, I didn't pop my knuckle. What was that? And so I pull my hand back and the tail is straight.
Wow.
That. Again, from Western medicine, I did not physically touch that. I played football. I dislocated my finger enough to know that you can snap that back in place, but there's a price to pay for that. When it snapped back in place, the cat did not bolt. The cat still sat there and just started purring. So I use this example a lot because a lot of times humans get in the way of their own healing. And also humans who are healers get in the way of their own healing, whether that's ego or self-limiting belief systems or whatever. So when you can do work on an animal, those get taken off the table. You don't have to worry about the bias, at least from the quote unquote patient point of view. Another time I stopped an asthma attack. Let me parse that differently. So Reiki stopped an asthma attack. I was in New Jersey, and my acquaintance was in San Francisco, and they were having a panic attack, which then led to an asthma attack, and they pulled over to the side of the road. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I said, dial 911, but don't push send. Close your eyes. Give me a minute. If you're not better in a minute, hit the button and call 911. If you are better in a minute, call me back. And so again, same type of thing. I'm thinking about this person, and I knew them personally. I've seen them in their asthma attack. Also, as a nurse, I've seen people who are in attack and in that distress, and it's this just evil cycle because you can't breathe and then you panic, and because you panic, then you can't breathe even more. And you have to break that cycle on one side or the other. And so I know this person likes lavender. And so in my mind, not only am I sending Reiki, but I'm also trying to get her to either see or smell lavender. And so I'm pushing this out from almost coast to coast. And a minute goes by, 2 minutes go by, 5 minutes go by. I'm like, okay, now I'm worried. I'm wondering if this person is now passed out on the side of the road, and I told them to push 911, and they didn't push it. And what are they going to do? Who's the last person they called? And then I've got the FBI showing up at my door saying, I contributed to whatever. So they called me back, and the first thing out of this person's mouth was, "How the fuck did you do that?" I'm like, well, tell me what that was, first of all. And yeah, it was like there's just like this overwhelming wave. She described it as a wave of peace. It was like she's like a warm blanket had hit my shoulders and just kind of rolled it down my body. But she felt this nice calming peace sensation, which then took away the anxiety. And because the anxiety, then the heart rate goes down, then the demand for breathing goes down. So then her body could catch up. And so and that was the problem, is that she didn't have her inhaler. And so she panicked, which then brought it on even more. Mm-hmm. And so she called me, I don't have my inhaler and I'm having an asthma attack. And I'm like, chill out, I'll call you back, or you call me back. So Reiki was able to help me stop an asthma attack from 4 time zones away.
Wow.
So again, it mimics the same thing that Ed did with his experiment. He was able to, distance doesn't matter, mm-hmm. but give me an intention, allow me the opportunity to focus. And in John's research, it showed that if you add an emotional content to that intention, it's almost like a catalyst in a chemistry equation. Mm-hmm. It just gives it so much more energy and so much more power.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the nitrous oxide to your engine, basically.
There you go. Mm-hmm. Do you run nitrous in your car, girl?
I do have a heavy foot when I'm driving. I do like to drive fast.
All right.
I've never used that before. So
change your last name to Fast and Furious.
I totally am on board with everything that you just said. Myself, I've been using Reiki since, I guess, for the last 15 years, but not a lot, because I just haven't really, I haven't had the confidence in myself to believe that it's really doing the work, because I was such a physical manipulating therapist through massage. I was so used to the feeling with my hands on, and that was so good. And I had such great success with it, that going to the non-physical healing or energy work was hard for me to really kind of step into with full confidence. However, now that I'm kind of past that and I really don't do much of that healing anymore, and it's much more predominantly energetic, and I work with it just in my own life, it's amazing. Like, I was working on my mom like maybe 6 months ago. For the first time, I was like, oh, Mom, you want some Reiki? She's like, oh, what's that? I'm like, oh, let me just, I'm going to do some energy work on you. And so she was like, okay. So she lies down on her bed with her head at the foot of the bed, and I'm just not touching her. I'm just, moving my hands wherever like they need to go. And at the end, I was guided to just place my hands around her head, not touching, but just like, energetically cupping her head. And in my mind, I saw all this white light start to light up her pineal gland. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And so then, and it got brighter, and I saw it getting brighter and brighter, and the light just growing. So then afterwards, I asked my mom, like, oh, so how did you like that? And she's like, oh, it was really nice. I really liked it. It was very relaxing. And I was like, oh yeah, did you feel the heat from my hands? And she goes, oh yeah, it was warm. She goes, but the colors. Yeah. And I said, the colors? Like, what are you talking about, Mom? And she's like, she goes, well, the colors. And I'm like, what kind of colors did you see? She goes, well, not colors. I'm like white light? She goes, yes, the lights. Like, did you turn the lights on? Did you have a flashlight over my eyes? And I said, no. And she said, she goes, oh, because I thought like you were shining light on my eyes because it just got so bright in the room. And I was like, oh my gosh, her pineal gland was lighting up. Like, and so like, that was just super cool for me to like have that experience with my mom, who is really not like in this world at all. Right. But then, you talked about using Reiki energy in a way to repair things, put things back together, heal things. But what about using energy to create things that we really want, without there being like that position of coming from behind the eight ball, but actually being in front? And I've been using it really a lot in my manifestations now, or not my manifestation, but my meditations. And you were talking about the importance of the emotion. And when I have been able to manifest things so quickly, whether it's incredible relationships with people, encounters with people, opportunities, whether it's business, whether it's just pure joyful encounters, whether by myself out in nature, whatever it is. And I believe that I can attribute it to when I'm doing this work in my meditations, where I literally go into meditation, and because I always listen to music that puts me in a state of mind where I feel very relaxed, and I can just feel the energy like oozing out of like my body. It's just, there's heat, there's buzzing, there's everything. And I play like a movie in my head of what I want to see in my now. And I go into the moment in all of its entirety. And it's not just about like feeling the emotions of being there, but I literally turn on all my senses, my 5 senses, as well as our 6th sense. And I pay attention to the temperature of the room. I pay attention to the music that's playing in the background. I always see myself laughing, giggling, smiling, having great conversations if I'm with people, doing activities I love to do. And I make it so that I feel like it's in my now, like I'm doing it now. And when I come out of my meditation, I literally feel like I was with those people. Like I actually just spent an hour with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely incredible. And so it speaks to like everything that you've just been talking about being proven through the power of intention, as well as the PK experiment, and then what you've been talking about with your Reiki energy.
And I've read about this in a couple of different areas, and I don't know what people know about the background of me, but it's like I started having psychic experiences at 9 and did not have a resource to go to try to figure out what the hell was going on. And so a lot of this was just kind of like self-intuition, or a lot of, borrow some corporate speak, a lot of putting things into parking lots for later quantification and experiment. But I have noticed that if I can create a sacred space or a bubble or an alternate reality where my intention is synchronized with emotion, it's extraordinary. But I've also noticed that if I try to do that same thing for me, it doesn't work. Or it works, but it's very blunted. But if I make that intention for other folks and I do it on behest of them, it happens pretty quick. And so then it becomes, oh shit, this means I've got to do some more self-work. God damn it.
Yeah, I mean,
we're back here again, damn it.
Yeah, the answer of why that's happening is pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was telling Michael about this, one of your previous guests. We both work at IBM, and I told him, I said, for years I had this recurring dream where the Titanic is sinking. I've got 1 foot on the Titanic. I've got 1 foot in a lifeboat, and I'm handing people off from the Titanic into the lifeboat, and the line stretches out for as long as you can see. And the boat is finite, and so it's slowly filling up, and people are taking their seat, and they're getting settled. And it gets to the point where there's 1 seat left, and there's still a line of people standing there. And so do I get on that last seat and save myself, or do I step off the boat and put 1 more person on, knowing I've condemned myself to death? And for many, many years, I was the one that stood on the boat and went down with it. And I would say probably in the past, I think it was maybe 3 years now, when the dream comes up, I take the seat. And so I choose to say that this is a result of my inner work, and saying that, as an abused child, I come with a set of baggage, but before I stepped into my meat suit, I asked for this baggage. And so part of my process in this lifetime is to learn how to either A, deal with that baggage, or B, find someone in life who has the matching luggage and we go traveling together.
that can turn out to be some heavy luggage, though.
Oh, sister.
It's like, who's carrying the luggage? You carry the luggage. I'm tired of carrying the luggage.
That's right. How much shit are you packing, woman? My God.
Oh, your episode with us, shopping at the Cosmic Costco. I really love that vision. And I can see how that's something that, in the way that we can interpret it here on Earth is exactly. Like before we incarnate, we go through the list, our grocery list of growth, and say, what is it that we're going to need in this lifetime? And so, I love that analogy. And
so part of my background and training is as either a teacher, trainer, nurse, the skill set requires you to find out where people are and then bring them to where they need to be. And I also feel like that if you do any kind of demographics research, you find out that most of the metaphysical business is being driven by women who are 35 to 65 years old, college educated, with disposable income. Chances are those women have men in their lives. And they're probably, oh, here we go to another mind, body, spirit bullshit thing, and maybe I can listen to ESPN and my phone without her catching me. But I think there is a place for the divine masculine to kind of reclaim its place in the world. And that's why I wrote the most recent book that I have, was that, it's metaphysics, dick joke. Metaphysics, dick joke, dick joke, dick joke, dick joke, metaphysics. And again, I think if you are building a path to where you want to take someone in a way that they see familiar landscape, they're going to be willing to take the journey. So if I say something along the tangent of, before you were born, you went to the Cosmic Costco and picked out things to play with this time around, I see more heads bobbing up and down. Yes, okay. But if I say, okay, in a pre-corporeal state, your spirit and your spirit master went into the Akashic records and decided to relearn some things, you can see eyes glazing over like a fat kid in a sugar coma.
Yeah.
So that's why I it comes across as flippant, but a lot of the times I have practiced my spontaneity.
Well, I totally agree. And I think one of the most important things that anyone can learn when they're trying to deliver a message is understanding your audience and knowing that the delivery of the message is sometimes more important than the content of the message, because your content could be fabulous, but if you're not delivering it in a way that the person can receive it, then that message is lost on deaf ears.
Yes.
And so if you can't find a way to translate it into a way that many people need it to be translated, because they're not at that place where, they understand the word non-corporeal and they understand what the Akashic records are and all that kind of stuff. How the heck are they ever going to understand what you're trying to maybe teach them about that could be very beneficial to them? And perhaps they really want the knowledge, but they have no idea how to receive it and relate to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other thing too that's been helpful, again, as a nurse, one of the things I used to do was I taught a class that was for people that was post cardiac bypass. And so after people have had these, 4 or 5 way bypasses, or in the industry they call them cabbages, grafted arterial bypass and graft, they talk about, well, let's put it this way. I've never met an atheist in these classes. They're all thanking God. They all say they're going to be on the straight and narrow and take care of themselves. And about half of them I will probably see sitting outside of McDonald's in their car, eating McNuggets and fries and, with a Marlboro hanging out the side of their mouth. Because people make choices that aren't necessarily for their best intention. And as a nurse, my responsibility is to educate, but not to enforce. And so I think doing the things that you do and that I do, there has to come a certain degree of surrender. Here's my experience and here's what I've learned, and my life is so much better, and so I'm going to share that with you. But whether you choose to do anything with that, sometimes it's really hard to take on that state of surrender. You just want to, grab them by their metaphysical throat and bitch slap them with the pen pan. I don't know if that's necessarily metaphysical or not, but that's the emotion sometimes that comes through. You've got 4 kids. This is your second bypass. Put down the McNugget.
Yeah. And it's so true. One of the things that I learned, because when you first start learning all this information, you get excited. You want to share it. Mm-hmm. And you don't understand why everyone isn't just as excited about it as you.
Well, yeah, you become an evangelist, and it's like, let me tell you about Jesus, or, people that either have recently become vegan, or people who have recently become whatever, then that's, I need to tell everybody about this. Okay, yeah, whatever. I don't care whether to find Jesus or, Jesus is in my sock drawer asleep, leave me alone. It's nice that when you learn something and you see its worth, that you have the mentality of, I want to share this with others, rather than, oh, let me see how I can package this and market it to the nth degree.
Yeah.
And that was part of my dissonance following my near-death experience, is that I work for the pharmaceutical industry. And I don't think I'm going to shock anybody that says we're not about making people well. We're about making profit and making shareholders profit margins and creating long-term users. And that does not resonate with me. Especially, I felt uncomfortable about it before my near-death experience, and I was doing things to I was like a human money laundering machine. It's like, pay me for those things, but it's like, okay, so the daughter gets violin lessons and the wife gets tires, and we all learned Reiki 1, and let's take an ecology course and go plant some trees. I was trying to kind of like wash that through me so that positive things came from it. But it still didn't change the idea that I'm manipulating clinical data and deliberately dropping out things that probably should be seen so that the drug looks better than what it is, so that it gets to market and makes money. I think we all, in our adult lives, we make trade-offs. There's the person that we want to be and the person that we find ourselves. And at that moment, we have to decide whether or not we want to do a course correction or whether we can continue to chew on that shit sandwich and keep going. And one of the things I've noticed over the past, I'd say maybe 20 years, people are getting really tired of eating their shit sandwich.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. You're seeing many more people starting to question, why am I doing this? What is this all for? And questioning if the ends really does justify the means. Thanks so much for doing this with me, John. Where can people find you and more information about you? And
Well, so I recently created a website that sounds extraordinarily egotistical. It's johnmathis.me, and it is an umbrella website where you can find all of the things I'm up to. Because of my cancer research background, I have a organic skin cream that I've created for people in radiation therapy or in cancer recovery. Uh, it's a mix of Western medicine and research from the National Institute of Health and American Cancer Association, but it's also got American Indian spirituality. It's got some Vedic medicine, and I also imbue the creams with Reiki. So depending upon how you want to come at it, it's helpful. I also wrote a book that started after 9/11, but I published it in 2012. That book's called The Alchemist Heir, and it's about a young child who is having some self-destructive tendencies after being bullied in high school. So he goes to live with his grandpa and learns about Reiki and meditation and metaphysics and all sorts of fun stuff. And then I have a book that I have written. It's with an agent, but I haven't published it yet, but that's about to change. It's called Guitar, Cigars, and Tiki Bars, A Guy's Guide to Spirituality, which it wasn't me having OCD. I really did write a book that is metaphysics, 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 dick joke, dick joke, dick joke.
I can't wait to read that.
Yeah, well, apparently my agent's husband has a bruised abdomen because she kept hitting him in the gut while he was asleep to wake him up and read him aspects of my book. And again, I believe the universe is conspiring to get this out in the world, because I was told to find an agent is a very arduous task. It was the second email I sent. So hopefully that snowball will keep rolling downhill.
Yeah, that's great. And do you have a YouTube channel that people will be able to get more information from you, videos, that kind of stuff?
I have a YouTube channel that is currently blank, but I will have one shortly. But I think if you search johnmathis.writing, that will take you to it.
Well, what I'll do is I have all the links for all that, so I'm going to leave them in the description below for anyone who wants to look into John and look at more of the stuff that he's doing, get more information. Just reading his bio alone on his webpage is well worth the trip on over there. I will say that.
Ruh-roh.
And also, if you want to listen to the episode that he was on our podcast, I believe it was episode 51. Shopping at the Cosmic Costco, remote viewing, and reptilian encounters. It's a great episode filled with tons of information beyond what the title says. So it's a great one. I've had a really good response from that. So many people have been telling me it's one of their favorite episodes and that they just loved it. So thanks, John, for that. And what else?
Yeah, that was a fun discussion. That was kind of like a frog in a blender. We were all over the place.
I know. Yeah, we were.
and we started out good too. By the way, I'm not Michael. That was probably the best intro to a podcast I've ever experienced.
Oh, leave it to me to screw it up with the name. But
and you
led into it perfectly, right? It was perfect.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. It should have been one of those things where it's like, they do the kung fu movies from the 70s. You just, you say Michael, but in a different voice, John.
Yeah.
No, it was great. I hope that I can come back soon and we can continue our weird discussions.
Yeah. Well, Michael was totally having a bromance with you, so he's looking forward to you coming back on again. And right. And I think that's it. So everyone, thanks for joining us. Do follow Matthew. There, I was going to call you Matthew. You see, do follow John Mathis. He's gonna have lots of great information coming out. He's finally stepping out and sharing all of his experiences, and he's literally an infinite tap source of wisdom, insight, and knowledge. So I can't wait to see what else you put out there.
That sounds extraordinary. I can't wait to meet this guy.
And we're going to work on that self-love. So,
Okay. And on that note.
So thanks everyone for joining us. Of course, if you need any more information about me, you know you can head over to my website, inflexibleme.com. I have a newsletter there that you can sign up for where you get information on all my blog posts, events coming out, and some tips here and there. And of course, I'll leave all the links for everything in the description below so you don't have to go and search for it. Thanks everyone. And John, thanks for being with us tonight.